इश्क पर जोर नहीं है, ये वो आतिश गालिब। इश्क पर जोर नहीं है, ये वो आतिश गालिब। कि लगाए ना लगे और बुझाए ना बने, और बुझाए ना बने।
Hello. Welcome to the 12th episode of Cut to Scene. And today we are back and we are discussing a part of the trilogy by Richard Linklater. And the first movie at that, which is called Before Sunrise. It stars Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, and Vienna, of course. Vienna, the city itself, plays a character. It was written by Richard Linklater and Kim Krazin and directed by Richard Linklater. And this is a 1995 release. Getting into the movie headfirst, what are your thoughts about this movie?
The movie can essentially be summarized in one line saying the two characters meet on a train and try to explore the city of Vienna until the male character has to catch a flight next morning to go back to the US. That is the plot of the film. Yeah, so that's the movie itself. Okay, first thoughts. I remember watching this in college. Okay, some context. Richard Linklater is a man I admire as a director. I remember watching what's the film? School of Rock when I was a kid, and of course I didn't know that it was directed by Linklater then. But I thoroughly enjoy that film, and still I enjoy it after I've watched it about 4 or 5 times now. I had also watched in college Dazed and Confused, which actually was it's a very rebellious film about a group of schoolgoers spending one night. And I really like that film too. Then he's also made other experimental films like Boyhood, which though it's like an achievement in itself, being shot over like 11, 14, whatever years, how many ever years it was shot over. But again, I didn't feel it appealed a lot to me, but then that's discussion for another episode. And coming to Before series, again, some context. It was extremely hyped in college. The whole Before trilogy is some sort of cult. I mean, at least in Pilani it was a cult. I'm guessing it's a cult in the world as well. And to be honest, when I watched Before Sunrise, I was very, very underwhelmed. Of course, it did not live up to its hype, but I didn't sense anything special about it. In the second watch, I did sense some things which were nice about the film, but I think my initial reading of the film not living up to its hype for me, I think is justified even now. I have not watched the third film in the trilogy, which is Before Midnight, but I have watched Before Sunset, and I think that is a much, much better film than Before Sunrise. Yeah. So basically, to summarize, I think Before Sunrise is again one of those experimental films that Linklater tried to make, which I don't really buy into.
Okay. So with me, the case is that, like you, I watched it in college, but I watched it after I had started appreciating writing and dialogue, and after I had watched the Aaron Sorkin masterclass, and so that is why there was this huge appreciation for this. At the same time, I also realized that I do not like watching heavy dialogue as much as I like writing heavy dialogue, which are two completely different games.
We all go through that.
Yeah. But then I have watched this movie, I think 3 or 4 times now, and I love it. I absolutely love the series, of course. I love that experimental part of it, that the fact that they actually explore this relationship grow from one accidental encounter to the other, 9 years down the line, and then again we make a jump by 9 years in Before Midnight. So I love that. I also feel that this movie can also have another reading, right? It can also be something that Jesse or Celine were just thinking of. Could very well just be that. We end with a shot of them being in trains and a bus, I think. Yeah, it could just very well have been them thinking of this because they encountered each other on a train, and that's it. That's where the thoughts took off. Yeah, now coming to what I love about this film is that constant in the trilogy itself, there is this constant conflict wherein the conflict is time. This is not a conflict that you can solve. this is not a conflict that can be resolved. It's the ultimate truth. I mean, it's the truth, at least in the universe that we live in. So in that sense, unlike other movies where conflicts can often, like you look for resolution of conflicts, here you're looking for the characters making peace with the conflict.
So, do you mean this to say for all the films in the series or just this one?
For all three.
Okay, but I would agree with you on that point because in Before Sunset, the conflict is actually resolved, right? He says, "I'm not going," so the conflict of time is no longer there. I mean,
No, but
literally the last
then he does go back to his family.
In Before Sunset,
Yeah.
but they oh okay, I didn't know that because I've not watched Before Midnight. Okay, I always assume that.
No, I think he does. I am not sure. So in Before Midnight, essentially he has divorced his wife, and he has now started living with Celine, and they have like
Twins.
two beautiful daughters, yeah, twins, and he had a son with his ex-wife.
Mhm.
So that is what they show.
But that is
So
there
now
in
even I am
Before.
not sure.
That's there in Before Sunset as well. That the
Yeah,
fact
in
that he
Before
has a
Sunset,
son.
they talk about the son and the wife. Yeah. But I'm not sure when the divorce thing happened, but whatever. My point essentially being that here the conflict character is time itself, right? So that is nice. And I somehow also like the vagueness of it, the fact that they are not like the plot isn't revolving around a lot except the two of them. And so we are just moving from one conversation to the other. And we also see that as we move from one movie to the other, the conversations get slightly less romantic or slightly less dreamy and more practical. So Before Sunset is loaded with this awkwardness where they have encountered each other after 9 years, but there is this weird awkwardness that you keep feeling that keeps interrupting them, and they constantly have to stay grounded in reality.
Right.
And Before Midnight, they are so grounded in reality, they are so surrounded by it that they cannot do anything to escape that. And probably that night is their only chance to escape it in a long time. So that is something that I find beautiful because it actually shows how you go from young romanticism to older practicality, as this.
Right. So you mentioned about. So yeah, as you mentioned, the series gets more real as the series progresses. I think that itself is what I related to the second and the third part. And of course, I've not watched the third part, but I've read the summary and whatever. And the first part, exactly, I didn't relate to because of the whole thing of no practicality. Maybe because I've not had those experiences at all. One other thing I would really like to appreciate about Before Sunrise itself is the fact that it chooses not to colorize Europe in the sense. So, in any movie that you take about Europe, in any general American film that you take about Europe, let's take Vicky Cristina Barcelona, for example, made by Woody Allen, okay, and they set it in Barcelona. There they decide to paint Barcelona in this sepia tone, and I don't understand why you do that because it, for me, it just takes away from the feel of the film. Generally, I mean, there might be some films where it is justified, but it generally takes away from the feel. In this film, they decide not to do it, and it seems so good. I mean, like it was a welcome change for me after watching all these films. Having sepia tone, and now probably on the second watch it appealed to me more because I saw going to Europe that the cities are fucking gloomy. They are not those bright cities that we are shown in movies. So yeah, that was one good thing I liked about the film. Of course, Before Sunset chooses to do the opposite and colorize Paris. Anyway, so yeah, that is one, and I also like uh, some selected scenes in the film. In fact, if I compare Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, the sort of the mood of the scenes is different, but the setup of the scenes is the same. It's a single camera setup, and for example, in the first in Before Sunrise, it's where they go into the listening booth, and I think that's one of the coolest bits of acting and speaking through visual imagery I've ever seen in cinema. So they're just standing for like I guess a minute or more than a minute, and they're just
Yeah.
looking at each other, just putting glances. Both of them know that they want to kiss each other, but they don't do it at
Yeah.
that point, and things like that. And that is building tension for the next scene, which is supposed to be on top of the Ferris wheel where they finally kiss. And the second scene I like in Before Sunset actually is the one where they're in the car, they're in the taxi, and they're fighting with each other. I mean, more or less fighting.
Yeah.
I think that's also a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so of course, I agree that the films have their own flashes of brilliance, but overall, Before Sunrise would not work for me as well.
Yeah, so as usual, let's maybe go about it in this way that we talk about the technicalities first, then we'll move to the what we feel about the film, or the major themes that are covered. So technically, what I noticed was that it had sort of a three-act thing, wherein I saw that, okay, like the introduction, if you could say so, was like 20 minutes of the movie, wherein they've gotten off. He's convinced her, they've gotten off the train. They are in the city now. We know that they are roaming around, and they are just wandering, and they're having conversations. So now they settle into the tram. This is the first 20 minutes of the movie, and in the tram they start with their question answer thing. They're trying to get to know each other better, right? The second act finishes around the time when they are in the park and they finally have sex. Okay, so that is like 85 minutes into the movie again. So the golden 20%, 65%, and 15% rule, it was somehow followed. It's a 100-minute film. So at that point, what happens is your whole second act has been about this couple trying to get to know each other, fall for each other, kiss, and then slowly build on with that conversation, with that relationship, with that affection, and slowly build on to the sexual tension also, which reaches its climax quite literally at 85 minutes. And then you have the separation part. फिर हिज्र का वक्त आ गया है. So and then that the last 15 minutes are sort of melancholic, or even the audience is like, okay, like what will they do now, right? Because we have invested so much time in knowing these characters. So that is one thing that I really liked. Another thing that I noticed was in the beginning of the movie, there is a lot of time before you see these two in the frame together. There are a lot of short reverse shot sequences in their conversations, which I noticed. I don't know why it was there. Probably I think it was there to then enhance the effect of those frames where we actually see them together.
Correct.
Maybe that was the scene, because in the train in yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I think that was a conscious choice. Also, I mean, even in the setup, I mean, you would think that in a train, setting up a scene is difficult because there's a cramped space. There is not many places that you can place your camera on, and place your actors and capture them in a nice way. So I think in that sense, the setting up of that scene is cool because they are initially on opposite sides of the. In fact, they are very far from each other. Then they come closer to each other, and then there's a whole short reverse shot thing that you mentioned. Of course, it is chosen in that way because when they get out from the train and when we see them together, it strikes us as some win for us as an audience. Like, we had seen them separate in from two separate viewpoints per se, right? And now we are seeing them as an audience from as a third person view from the eyes of the camera, right? From earlier we were mostly seeing them from the eyes of each other, and now we are now taking a step back, and now because they are together, they are one. We see them from the eyes of the camera. So I think the setting up is pretty interesting, I guess.
Yeah, also in the start, the camera pans so of course we first of all start with the middle-aged couple who are fighting over a newspaper. We quickly cut to just one shot of a very old couple, where the wife is reading a newspaper and the old person is sitting and staring out of the window. We cut to this guy who's just sleeping with his mouth open. So that sort of was like a foreshadowing about the things that they are gonna have a conversation about, and how they are gonna go from, and the entire spectrum of a male female companionship sort of a this thing. I felt that was pretty interesting. And then slowly, as the conversation builds up, and as you mentioned, when they get off the train, as a practical person, as a practical member of the audience, you'd be like, "What? No, you're not seriously doing this." I mean, 25 years down the line, if someone tells you, or if a girl tells you that she got off the train with a guy who she did not know like half an hour back, and she got up just because, and she thought she'd explore the city, that would be a pretty alarming thing in today's day and age. The fact that there was this period where it wasn't alarming and it was okay, just another thing that they did, or just another adventure that they went off to, seems pretty whimsical to me. Whimsical, and also nice. Like it feels very warm that someone can actually do that and be safe and just like have a healthy conversation. But yeah, what struck me was in terms of acting, what struck me was that these two actors, I am not sure about Ethan Hawke, but at least Julie Delpy, she very well captures the desire aspect of a character, in the sense that the way she looks at Ethan Hawke at times, and the expressions that she uses, or the way she twitches her lips, can exactly tell you, or you can take a guess of what she's thinking. Why I say it not Ethan Hawke? Because despite having watched the three movies multiple times, I still find that character a bit shady.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Right.
don't know why.
Okay, I have not watched a lot of films by Ethan Hawke. I have watched a couple of films at least with Julie Delpy, and the one that stood out for me was Krzysztof Kieslowski's White. So Krzysztof Kieslowski again
I haven't
uh,
watched.
has this trilogy. It's called the Three Colors trilogy, called Red, White, and Blue, or Blue, Red, and White. I don't remember the. It's Blue, Red, and White. It's basically the colors of the French flag, and liberty, equality, fraternity, things
Mhm.
like that. So every film is made on a certain theme. And she acts in the second film, which is White, and again, like brilliant in that film. I would go so far to say that that's my favorite film among the three, though people disagree and people have their own favorites. Coming back to you mentioning, I was really hooked on to one thing that you said, the way she twitches her lips, and that's so true. I mean, you look at it in the scene where Ethan Hawke or Jesse comes back into the train to tell her, "Ki, let's come, let's
Yeah.
go Venice," and she's like,
Yeah.
and when she says, "Yeah, I think so too," you can see it
Mm.
on her lips, the way it
Yeah.
you can see it on her lips
Yeah.
that she is, I don't know if it's sexual desire or just desire of companionship, but there is desire in her lips. Now, of course, I mean, I can't really describe it much further because we don't have video here, but that exactly is the thing, right? And people always say that most acting is good reacting, right? And that's the point, right? When she's not, when she's doing these things with her lips, she's not really speaking a lot, right? I mean, if you just hear it on audio, you'll just feel, oh, it's a nicely intonated line, that's it. But I
Yeah.
think what the power of good acting lies in that act of having control of every fucking muscle in your body and on your face,
Right.
and
Right.
making use of it in the right moment. And that is what I think Julie Delpy does really, really well. Which
I
I
think, as you said, that yeah, that gets highlighted very well in the listening booth scene, because here are two characters who have nothing to do,
yeah,
literally just
yeah,
listen to music and stare at each other. And while that moment is very, very awkward, it still has a tinge of sensuality to it. It's not awkward in the awkward way,
right, right. I mean,
right?
there's this sly smiles that she cracks in the middle,
Yeah.
and you notice the timing of their looks, right? I mean,
Huh.
so I did see an interview in which Julie Delpy said that most of the things in the film were not improvised, in the sense it was not come up on the actual moment that they were filming. In the sense, even if so, I also tried to go through the script. A lot of the dialogues were different from what are
Mhm.
actually in the film.
Yeah.
Uh, but Julie Delpy says that it is not the case that the dialogues themselves were not written. It's not like a freestyle conversation
Mm.
between them. The dialogues themselves were written. Maybe they were written on the set, impromptu, but there
Right.
also were a lot of rehearsals before they went into doing it. So, in that sense,
Right.
it is not an impromptu film, though the film might have been written on set, right? And that is
Correct.
what strikes me about, if that is true. And then if you look at the listening booth scene, then it's a marvelous piece of direction as well, because then if you want to really time those looks at
Right.
looks of, let's say, Julie Delpy's character to Jesse's, I mean, whatever, Celine to Jesse, and Jesse to Celine, and bring in the awkwardness and the sensuality with it. It's gonna be a hell of a job to direct, and I don't know how to explain it in a better way, but I think I say this from my personal experience. I mean, people think that for a film or for a theater piece, the biggest contribution, because all they see in front of them is the actor
Mm.
or the stage
It's
or
the
set or
actors.
whatever, right? But
Right.
like, for example, I got asked this question by a friend a couple of days ago, that what does direction mean? And I could not give her a better answer rather than saying ki whatever choices you see being made on screen or on stage, all choices can be attributed to the director. So if a film is good, then the credit goes to the whole crew of the film.
Right.
But if a film or a theatre piece is bad, the credit, the zimmedari of the badness actually goes to the director because he or she has made those artistic choices that have gone into the film which you disagree with.
Correct.
And that could be as
Correct.
simple as something like a casting choice, like the
Yeah.
classic example of that is Rockstar and Nargis Farid. I mean,
Yeah.
I think almost everybody in the world would agree that she was the wrong person for that role.
Right.
That blame does not go to her; it goes to the director. I'm sure he had, a lot of choices to experiment with, but he chose Nargis Fakhri, and it turned out to be a bad.
Right, makes sense. I see what you're saying, but I'd like to explore the other point where I'm saying that I don't know why I find Ethan Hawke's character as a bit fishy. Is that because of the casting choice? Is that because the character is supposed to be so? Or is that just because there are certain expressions? Or is that also because I am a male and I suspect him of trying to get in her pants?
Basically, I mean, the one reason that I didn't believe his character much was because of his mustache. I
Yeah.
kept getting distracted by his mustache to take him seriously. But anyway, more seriously, I guess it was, especially in Before Sunrise, it was because I would always suspect something fishy on the part of a man if he
Yeah.
is doing something like this. So
Yeah.
of course that's one thing, and maybe it's not it's just something ingrained in me in the sense it's
Right.
a myth that is being purported by media and in general
Yeah.
where you read in newspapers etc. Because if you come back and turn the question around and ask me that if I was in such a situation and I would be the one asking that, would I be asking it with bad intentions? And I would say no because I don't think I'm that person. But in general, if you try to compare it to your perception of a general male, you are biased to think that he has bad intentions in his head. So,
Exactly. So yeah, that feels a bit weird. But actually, now that I reflect upon it, I find his character most believable in Before Midnight.
okay.
Here's why. Because in Before Midnight, he's playing the man child.
Mhm.
He's playing that person who is looking to get into the pants of his wife or girlfriend or whatever it is, right? Or if not that, he's playing that person who's slightly careless, who is going through, who is being nagged by his wife for something, and but he just does not want to care, and he so I get that character when he says something. I believe him because I think he's being more honest there. But in the previous two installments, I think that I doubt everything that he says and I second guess it because I'm like, no, you're just, I mean, this is fake. You're just saying things because you have to impress her, and that seems pretty interesting to me in
Right.
the socio-cultural context that we are in.
Right. And I mean, you talked about being fake, and I would go as far to say that all the stories that he made up about his girlfriend also seem fake to me.
Maybe.
I don't know why I felt that. I really have no explanation for why. I think let's just admit it. Ethan Hawke is not as good an actor as Julie Delpy. I mean, even in the the wealth of films that both have produced and the careers that have had. I mean, Julie Delpy's career just stands out like from miles away, right? But yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons could be that as well because there is a person who's at least for me overpowering any frame that they're in.
Yeah,
Apart
maybe.
yeah. Okay, yeah. So I want to talk a bit about the cinematography of the film. And I really say this because people say that if your cinematography choices are coming forth to you very directly, then it's probably the film is standing on the shoulders of the cinematography and not the other.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
a film which breaks that myth. I mean, sorry, not
right,
break that myth. It does not subscribe to that. The
right.
cinematography is very like in Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. The cinematography is always in the background. We know that it's all these steady cam slash handheld shots. We know that it's just following these two characters. But the beauty of the cinematography comes when things are lit and when things are framed. So, for example, there is this whole conversation where they are talking about Jesse's character having to deal with some guys who had tried to catcall his girlfriend back in America. Right? There's this one scene where he's talking, and
Yeah,
the very
yeah.
next scene, like when Jesse and Selena are walking, they are walking on the right side of the frame. At the left side of the frame, there are four guys who are actually trying and staring at Celine and discussing things among themselves. But they don't raise a objection to that. The whole,
Right.
the way they don't catcall her as the way they America, which might be
Right.
accurate, description of the or accurate comparison of both countries. Though I've not been to America, but
Right.
but that I think struck me as like very interesting, that choice, in the sense that it's being put
Okay.
into the frame without, and it's a really long shot. It's probably like 40-50 second shot where the camera is just stationary and there's these people talking on the left side of the frame and Jesse and Celine walking. So I think those such choices are what make this film interesting for me. Of course, the cinematography choices in and or the framing choices that are used in the listening booth we've already talked about. But even the way the film sort of ends, right? I I I really like the way that they went back to the same places that Jesse and
They
Selena
started
visited,
from.
right?
Yeah.
So, which is to signify, in my opinion, that things, even though there is this one couple who's coming on whatever 16th of June, and staying around there, the next day the city does not stop for them. The city moves on to basically to say that life moves on, and that also might be a hint to the fact that Jesse and Celine did not or didn't turn up or missed each other 6 months down the line. So,
Yeah.
so I like these visual storytelling choices a lot in the film. Yeah, you have any?
So coming to, yeah, I mean that last scene also sticks to me because there are a few shots of the places that they've visited, right? And the first thing that came to me at that point was that, so I think there is this shot of a place which is in a lane,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
first thing
they're
that struck
sitting.
me, yeah, and probably they were sitting there at night in
Hmm.
the previous instance when they arrived there.
Yeah,
So what struck me was, wait, this place does not look as magical as it did back then. It's more of something like, now there's an incomplete frame in front of you, or now it's time to go back to reality because that dream is over. So that comes across as pretty nice. But now I would, are there any other technical aspects that you want to talk about?
I mean, yeah, not particularly, but I just mentioned that even in all the scenes that I mentioned, I think the editing also plays a very nice part, especially in the short reverse shot scenes. There. It's never the kind of editing that we see
Right.
in whatever. Like we talked about in the episode Gulal also, the editing that we see in the Indian soaps, right, where it's just people just short reverse shot for the sake of it. This is very natural conversation in the whole
Right.
short reverse shot paradigm, and which I think is pretty good. Yeah, anyway, yeah, that's all
Right.
from me from the technical aspects of this film. Yeah.
So then I'd like to also talk about the conversations that they have. Do you think these are random conversations, or do you think there was like a hidden meaning or a bigger theme at play?
I mean, I think it's. I mean, here there is like extreme personal bias coming, but I was the biggest thing for me about the conversations was it didn't convince me that they were doing any service to the story at all. So, which is to say that I don't think there was a big meaning in the stories themselves. Maybe there could be. So, for example, I distinctly remember this one scene where Celine's character is, and they have basically having a conversation about men and women, and basically the same scene where he's saying that my girlfriend was catcalled by other men, and then she's like, let's just end it here. There's no end to this conversation. Maybe it's the women that I have in my life right now, or I've also had in my life in general. I don't think any conversation with the women I know will end that way. At least, modern 21st century women, because
So,
it is that. So,
but do you think that has something to do with the time the movie was set in?
95.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I somehow think so.
Okay.
Uh, I'll tell you why. Because she has a very strong worldview, Celine, in that sense.
Yeah.
Because very early in the tram itself, she mentions that when he asks what makes you sad, she says that what makes me sad is that 300 kilometers from here there's a war waging that people are not paying attention to, that no one talks about. So she has a very strong worldview, which you also see later in Before Sunrise, Before Sunset,
Sunset.
right? Where she's working towards social causes, and at the same time, I get that this topic disturbs her, but then what I think is that okay, earlier on in the train when he mentions why he's here, how he went to Madrid, met his girlfriend, broke up, something of that sort he mentions,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
In the train, and there's a very distinct movement in her eyes, which tells you that it is slightly off-putting for her. The fact that he's mentioning another woman is slightly off-putting for her. So I think it was one a callback to that, in the sense that he's recalling an experience with another woman. So she does not want to go further with that. And second, she also probably is thinking that with the amount of time that they have in hand,
Mhm.
and given that both of them have established that this was something that they are against, with the amount of time in hand, does she want to spare more moments to this topic?
I see.
And I'd also go as far to argue that that topic did not have the same weightage that it does right now,
I see.
back in 95. I mean, the
Um,
prevalence of that topic.
okay. I mean, I'm not convinced by your last point that the prevalence was not
Mhm.
enough. No, but now, I mean, the fact that they are, I mean, she might have chosen to let go is a more plausible reason to me. But nonetheless, I
Mhm.
mean, this is just, let's say, one conversation, right? The other conversation
Right.
also didn't really make me believe that it was taking the movie forward. For example, yeah, okay, there are these instances of magic realism, so to say,
Mhm.
that Linklater puts in the film, where there's one with the palm reader, the other with person who
Poet.
writes poems, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, they're not exactly magic realism, but then they are. I really did not understand the motivation for that to be put in the film, especially the poet scene. I mean, in the palm reader scene, at least you can make an argument saying that there's a certain insecurity that Jesse has about himself when he's not the center of attraction. That is established. So sure, I mean that could go towards building the character of Jesse himself. Though I don't think that itself plays any part, at least in this film. But I feel the scene with the poet was just there for poetry's sake. It was just not very convincing to me. What are your thoughts about that scene?
So I somehow find that okay. Like I somehow am okay with the fact that that scene may not. I agree that maybe that poet scene does not take that story forward, but it is okay because it was a beautiful scene in its own right. So I am like कि ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं है. मतलब that's completely fair. I am like कि it's not a movie necessarily which is rushing towards a story. If you look at it in this sense, the movie also stays put at a lot of times. For example, what I observed initially was that it's a 73-page script. It's a 100-minute movie,
Mhm.
and I've seen it before, but this time while watching it, I was like, oh god, there's so much to show from this evening to the next morning. Happen that they're gonna talk about and everything. Why aren't they directly getting into it? But the movie in the beginning takes a good 5-6 minutes just showing you train tracks, random railway routes, establishing that there's a river there and all of that, right? So I think वो ठहरा है उस मूवी में,
Mhm.
and I like that about it. That it lets conversations be there. It invokes that feeling of matlab, it'll give me more things to think about. Like maybe
Right.
their conversation about how Celine feels that she's an old woman inside, and Jesse feels that he's a young boy inside.
Mhm.
Is giving me more things to think about.
Right.
I
So
find that pretty interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
it's very interesting that you say this because I didn't. My main problem with this film is that it didn't give me enough. Apart from, I mean, when I say that, I mean in context of the characters themselves. Now there is one personal bias that I have also when watching films, where I think that real life or a real incident, or basically in general, this real life does not make for good movie stories. So, for example, I could very well write a, a movie about my college life, but I will have to exaggerate at some points because I have to create intention of
Right.
and resolution.
Right.
So I personally
Right.
have a bias against movies which are real. Now, then you could argue, then how does one make a biopic? Any good biopic that you take subscribes to the whole intention, obstacle, resolution, wala thing. Take Bhag Milkha Bhag. It is not a biopic.
Also, yeah, like
Yeah, it's not a biopic
no,
that
go ahead,
stays
go ahead.
true to the story itself, in the sense that
Right.
it exaggerates the story. In the sense, it says that Milka Singh lost the Olympics race or whatever race he was in due to the fact that he remembered partition ke time pe him running away. Right? Of course, that is not the truth. But the movie takes that liberty to create that conflict, which is resolved in the end. That is the reason I think this movie, in my opinion, does not do that. Before Sunset, does it? Before Sunrise, I think did not do it as much for me as the others would have. So I ended up taking almost nothing from the film in the sense about the characters. I didn't think I got to know the characters very well, apart from very very tertiary things about the people. Things like, as you mentioned, Celine is has really strong worldview. What's his name? Jesse has divorced parents and things like that.
Right. But adding on to what you were saying, just apart from the intention obstacle part, what also makes those movies or those biopics interesting to watch is that they have activated and decision making protagonists,
Hmm.
right? And that is why our lives are not as interesting because we are not as strongly decision making as the characters in our movies often are, right? And a lot of our life also revolves around silent moments where we are just thinking, and thinking is not camera friendly
Not at all.
in the most fundamental sense, right? So that is why probably it also has an effect. But if you look at it, the conversations that they have, I mean, watching this movie is like watching an ideal, like something like an ideal one night stand. I, I mean, that is just like a thought that I had, was that matlab just observing that and then observing what we see in today's context and where things have come from. Like, okay, for example, she acknowledges that as soon as they stepped off the train, she had made the decision that she'll sleep with him, right? And there is a substantial amount of sexual tension throughout the movie.
Of course, there is. Yes.
But then again, that is not the driving force of their relationship,
I mean,
right?
if you look at it that way, of course, the film makes sense and it seems to work.
No, I'm saying it seems very dreamlike and it seems very idealistic.
Oh yeah, I completely agree that the film is dreamlike.
Hmm.
And I think there's one scene where the characters allude to them being in a dreamlike universe. But that just is just a justification for it to be dreamlike just by just the characters talking themselves and saying that they're in a dreamlike universe. Just doesn't cut it for me, is what I'm saying. And of
Correct,
course the
correct,
film is
correct.
dreamlike, and I understand if people like that genre of films, right? Which are very dreamy, and but yeah, I generally fail to see the innovativeness in it.
Like,
Because
I love the meta comment that she makes when she says that they're in the garden, and Celine says that, well, I don't want to be just another grand story, and I love the irony of it
I see.
because that is what she is. In the next movie, we find out that she exactly became a great story for him to tell to the world.
Mhm. Right.
And yeah, so that was yeah.
Another thing I feel about this film is that it might work well. So if I see it with Before Sunset, it works for me. Which brings me to the, sort of conclusion that this would have worked had it been like one one movie. Before Sunrise plus Before Sunset have been one movie, and like I could have just had an interval and had popcorn in the middle. So I
So
mean,
then
of
what
course,
I
this is,
find,
this is
yeah,
my Bollywood sensibilities coming in here, but yeah, I mean,
right.
of course, I think the movie. I mean, jokes aside, I think the movie works if you put it in the context of the three movies. So, for example, if I was a viewer in 1995, and assuming that my sensibilities were the same as they are now, I would not have liked the film. But
Right.
if you put it together with At Least Before Sunset, I tend to like the film because now I have context from both sides. I know the past and the future in some sense, right?
Right.
So I sort of think this movie works well within if you see it in the context of the trilogy.
Right. And then what happens, what interests me further is knowing the actual inspiration,
Yeah, right,
which is mind blowing
right,
and
right.
heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah,
Right? Because then you look at it and then you think about what you were just saying,
uh-huh.
and you see how there was never a second part and
Exactly.
there was never a third part, and
Right.
all of that is just a figment of imagination. So for those who do not know, please do check out the actual story behind the inspiration behind the Before trilogy, and it's a beautiful story in its own right. But yeah, so coming to this then, what do you okay? Do you think you would be this engrossed in someone in one night?
I mean, not at all in one night for sure. Uh,
Okay.
it would have to be given, let's say, a fair bit
It would
of
have to be
prepping up. It would have to be given a fair bit of
okay.
prepping up before that incident,
Mhm.
and maybe then I meet the person one night or one day, and then things can go on. But
At Marine Drive. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Anyways,
Mummy is watching this. I'm
so
gonna cut this out.
so it's okay. At Marine Drive, what the fuck did I say? At Marine Drive.
Yeah,
Hopefully, you meet that person at Marine Drive. Yeah.
yeah,
Namaste,
someday in the
auntie.
future.
Yeah. So
I know, Devas, just I'd like to ask you this question back because I expect a more
I
interesting
think
from you.
so. I think it can happen in one night. Like I think it can. I mean, see, I do not know how long term there this thing is, right? I
Yeah.
mean, in the heat of the moment, at that very moment, everyone would obviously feel that this is a lifelong thing.
Uh-huh.
Right. Now, in retrospect, obviously, everyone will say that, okay, nahi, nahi, aisa kuch nahi hota, that it is immature, like that one night thing was just a one night thing type of a thing. But I think that it is possible that after like one night, I might get convinced that, wow, this is just,
So and no, also, okay, a disclaimer is that I was only speaking for myself, and I can totally believe that people would go through this decision making process
no,
because,
no, I'm also speaking about myself, and I'm saying,
uh,
yeah, हो सकता है
uh,
कि at that very moment, after like one whole this series of conversations and this series of experiences, that I start believing that, okay, this is crazy and I have to get back to this, and this has to be, yeah.
yeah, and it's so interesting that everybody you ask this question to will come up with an answer. Of course, there'll be a yes, no, maybe
Yeah.
answer, but everybody's reasons might be different. Sometimes they might not be
Right.
able to even express it. The people who express it
Right.
end up writing stories about it. But like
Right.
that's why I think I mean, and this is my age-old argument, which I've been thinking of from this time since I was in third year of college, that the reason why we have so many love stories, or there is a figment of love in every story that we see, is because, and this me being extremely philosophical, that you know everybody perceives love in very, 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 very different ways, and hence every person's experience being vomited out into a script gives us a unique story. So I don't think there is the other emotions, pain, anger, etc., are actually experienced in so many different ways as love is and philosophy.
Exactly. Like I also think that it is also that it is so universal, and like the fundamental emotion behind it is so universal
Mhm.
that everyone is bound to have their own
Yes,
story of it. Yeah.
right, right.
And while you see a lot of interpretation, or while you see a lot of different sorts of representation of the other emotions or the other extremes of emotions, say anger. You see, you have seen tons of, representations of that, and there are tons that I believe are absolute, in the sense that there is this sort of absolute that, okay, at my most angry, I would burn the world, okay, or I would destroy other people's lives, right? So that definite thing has been said, right? But for this feeling, there is no definite that we have said,
Right. Right.
and multiple stories are just trying to do that, to set
Yeah.
a definite.
In fact, even if you try to, coarse grain it and look at from a slightly, between micro and macro perspective, it is one of the only emotions which are also very, very influenced by socio-political, cultural context, right? I mean, in general,
Correct.
a society decides some rules in which love should and should not be, but because love is so universal and it does not really have any language or whatever, that people trying to break out of these rules also gives it more and more conflict. But yeah, anyway, that's too much of rambling. By the way, I came up with this
Yeah.
philosophy one night in Malvia 1102 discussing with you, by the way, just saying.
We're discussing with me.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know. We were discussing movies, I guess,
Yeah.
and love maybe. But
As usual.
as usual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, as usual again. But yeah, but okay, coming to this, have you had such an experience where you have wanted that this, like, that a night does not end?
No, actually not. I've always got closure. So no.
Wow, that's one lucky soul, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I've always got
Mr.
like
Closure.
some form of, but there has always been closure.
It could be deferred, when that closure has come after a long, long time. No, but I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm not saying that I'm not talking about receiving closure or not. I'm just saying that an experience where, okay, so for me, for example, I don't remember if there are multiple or yeah, whatever, but I have had a night which I never wanted, like I hope that this never ends. Like, for example, the last night of 4-2, when
Mhm.
I was at where I was sitting on Nap Slope, and I never wanted that to end, because I was with friends. I was among the people I love, and that just that emotion and that feeling was so strong that I never wanted it to end. And what this movie does so beautifully for me is that it captures that and the after effects of that very, very well.
Mhm.
So the next day, the next morning, when you have stayed up and the morning has come, and like you have, say, only 2-3 hours to go, at that moment, that feeling, and even the weather, like down to specifics, like the weather, I could feel that. And an irony is that, well, they were at a statue,
Right.
and of course that reminded me of some statues back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but yeah,
Right.
I could totally relate to it, and I
Yeah.
could totally
And
see how, I could
yeah.
guess how they were feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say, and yeah, I mean, sadly, I've not felt that even in a positive way ever. I've never really felt that some, because most of the such things that have the moments that could have been in my life have always been abrupt, so to say. So yeah, I've never felt that,
Okay,
and
maybe. But no, it might not be as sad as you are thinking it to be. It might just be that you were saved from some scars. So it's okay. But yeah, and that is why I feel that this movie is so beautiful, in the sense that, because I could feel that weather when I saw the two of them sitting at the statue, and in the early morning. So yeah, do you have any other questions or things that you'd like to ponder on?
let me just think about. Yeah, I'll just ask you one final question, okay? And it is something that I have already answered in the podcast already. Do you think this film stands up really well on its own, or do you think it needs to be viewed as a part of the trilogy for it to stand up on its own?
For me, it does it. it stands out on its own because for me it's a complete story in its own, wherein the characters had to choose an end or had to choose a definitive end, and they probably choose not to define it. Because I am pretty sure that at that very moment, Linklater did not know that he'll make another movie 9 years later.
I see. Okay. Oh, I don't. I mean,
Right.
I have no. I don't know if that was the case, but like anyway. Also, do you
I
believe?
don't know if Linklater thought that or not, of
Yeah.
course, but yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that I am thinking that when this film was made, it would have been made as an individual piece, and for me, it stands as an individual piece also.
I
Yeah,
see.
go ahead. What is your next question?
No, I mean, I just want to ask. Would you be happy if something like this happened in your life? I mean, especially like, don't look at this in like,
The original story.
yeah, the original story, but don't look at it in context of the other two films. Just this film, where you have the end.
Just this film happened.
Yeah, just the end is undefined. So it could be anything.
Yeah, I mean, see, I am a person who believes that you are lucky if you feel things, and you are lucky if you feel extremes of emotions also, because that is just a part of life and that is a way of living. I mean, experience all emotions, and that is, I mean, that is, I think that is one of the ways of enjoying the life that is given to you also, like the human form also, the fact that you have the capability and capacity to be able to experience all the extremes of emotions. So in that sense, if you are telling me that in one condensed time span I get to feel so much and so strongly, I would love it. It'll be a ride for me, right? The ups and the downs both, of course. It might be that, and then for like a couple of years I'm scarred, but then that is a journey of its own. So in my own, I mean, I know that I'm romanticizing this a bit, but I think I'd enjoy it.
And weirdly, the answer for me is also yes, though I don't like the film a lot. But that's exactly the reason I don't like the film, because I think this
Yeah,
could happen. I mean, this is something that can happen,
yeah.
and yeah, I mean, like if it happens, it's real well and
But
good.
हुआ नहीं है अभी तक.
I just नहीं नहीं बिल्कुल नहीं हुआ यार अब तक. And if it happens, well and good for me, but I just don't think I would sit and make a story out of it, whereas I think you would.
Maybe I would. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
I
So
can see that happening.
yeah. I guess so. So okay, that on that note, I guess we'll just end the episode. It's been a very odd episode in the sense that
Yes.
we've just ranted a lot and we've talked a lot. But hey, I guess once in 12 episodes, once in a dozen, we are allowed to do this. So yes, if you like this, please.
And yeah, I mean, as from the feedback that we got from some listeners, I mean, this is one episode where we have sort of dived into what we felt, how we see this in the context of our lives, and yeah, sort of exposed ourselves and our vulnerabilities also to some extent, though we have been pretty protective of them. So yeah, so in that sense, it is also an experiment. Do let us know how you feel about that. Do let us know how you feel about maybe knowing us a bit better by our 12th episode.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
go ahead.
And
Go
if
ahead.
there are enough requests for knowing us better, we will have like a rapid fire round like Coffee with Karan sometime soon. Anyway, and we are
Dude,
actually looking
we
forward.
have like 60 listeners. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
sure. Like
okay.
one of them comes and takes like uh,
Yeah,
the rapid fire round. I'm cool. Okay.
a
Anyway,
rapid fire.
so if you want to be the
Yes.
host on that rapid fire round, please do subscribe to Cut to Scene on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever else you can find us. Please write back and tell us that you want to be the host, and also give us feedback about this episode. Please also like all our posts, share all our posts, tell your friends about it, and that's the only way we can grow. And the next 2 months might have something very interesting in store for you. We're still figuring out the details, but hopefully we'll have something really interesting in the next 2 months. And
Some
okay,
big ass announcement to make.
what? क्या बोला?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. That's some optimistic announcement to make, basically.
Yeah, but like, I mean, there might be really good
It's
things
okay.
about this.
Inshallah. Yeah.
So again, as I said, please like, share, subscribe, and keep listening and stay well amidst this pandemic. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Baby, come on. Forget what Father Brennan said. We were not born in sin. Leave a note on your bed. Let your mother know you're safe. And by the time she wakes, we'll have driven through the state. We'll have driven through the night. Baby, come on.